one of her many accomplishments. For years now, Shira has been a celebrated teacher, a teaching mentor, and an administrator at Ramaz, at Mayanot High School in Teaneck, and elsewhere. In addition, just this year, she co-founded the Lamdeinu Center for Jewish Learning in Teaneck, where she serves as assistant dean. We at Revel are very proud of her achievements and therefore call upon her as the 2015 class representative.
Thank you so much for
in this chair?
inviting me to speak and to this very distinguished audience. On a personal note, I began my coursework here at Revel right out of college, and whether it was procrastination, as my husband said, or perseverance, as Dr. Cohn has framed it, it took me more years to finish my degree than I'm willing to mention, so I'm really gratified to be here today. One thing that's been nice about having that long perspective is that it's been really wonderful to see the way that Revel has continued to develop from its very strong foundations, and seeing this really genuine sense of community that's developed between students and faculty through the creation of physical space, lectures, and programs that promote interactions and give Revel its own space and identity. The topic that I will briefly speak to you about tonight, or today, is one that intrigued me through the confluence of two things in my life. As Rabbi Cohn mentioned, most of my professional life has been teaching Tanakh to high school students and adults, some of whom are here today. A number of years ago, I was teaching a course in Sefer Devarim. And this particular book, containing Moshe's final speech to the Jewish people, is replete with repetitions, as is underscored by the name Deuteronomy, meaning repetition of law in Greek and derived by the Septuagint, and also Chazal's name, Mishneh Torah. I was particularly intrigued by the narrative repetitions in the beginning section of the book, some of which contradict earlier biblical accounts. Soon after teaching this class, I audited a course with Dr. Cohn in Revel studying literary analysis of the Bible. One of the topics that we studied was varied repetition of narrative sections of the Bible and how the differences are often reflective of I began to wonder how these techniques, which were modern, could be applied to the narrative repetitions in particularly Sefer Devarim, and specifically whether any medieval exegetes had engaged systematically in this type of analysis. One example of a repetitive narrative is the story of the sending of spies from the desert prior to the Jews entering the land of Israel. The narrative is first recorded in chapter 13 of Bamidbar, then retold by Moshe in the first chapters of Sefer Devarim. The most glaring contradiction between the two accounts is whether the spies were sent at the directive of God or in response to the initiative of the people. That would be Bamidbar, God, and initiative of the people in Devarim. This contradiction can be approached in different ways. From a historical perspective, an interpreter would be concerned with what actually happened. Was the sending of the spies the result of human or divine intervention? A literary interpretation, though, would be more interested in what the differences between each version reveal about the point of view of the narrator of each story. In attempting to resolve this contradiction, both French and Spanish exegetes, medieval specifically commentaries, including Rashi and Ibn Ezra, harmonized the two accounts into one composite narrative, where the nation requested of Moshe to send spies. Subsequently, God commanded the people to do so. Now, Nachmanides, however, took a different approach. Like his predecessors, he also created a composite narrative that incorporated both versions of the story. But Nachmanides was the first to highlight the difference between the two accounts and explained how the disparities between them were actually thematically purposeful. According to Nachmanides, the earlier request by the people was intentionally omitted in Bamidbar, so God's command would be understood as a new initiative. God was not simply acquiescing to the people's request, and as such, his command delineated a different set of requirements that emanated from a divine source. Similarly, Moshe had a similar purpose, had a specific purpose for focusing on the people's request in his speech to the Israelites in Devarim, and leaving out God's role entirely. Moshe's goal in retelling the story of the previous generation was to rebuke the current group of Israelites, and thus influence their future behavior and decisions. Thus, Moshe highlighted the nation's role in the sin of the spies so that they would not be able to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. In this presentation, both Bamidbar and Dvarim contain purposeful presentations of the same event. In each case, though, taking into account the point of view of the speaker. This approach is very much in line with Adele Berlin's comments in Poetics and Interpretation of Biblical Narratives, where she states, the biblical narrator is omniscient in that everything is at his disposal, but he selects carefully what he will include and what he will omit. Nachmanides bolstered his interpretation with a close reading of the request and the command. While the Israelites asked for spies, that they search the land for us, God commands the spies latur, to scout. By citing biblical verses that use each of these verbs, Nachmanides demonstrated that lachpor indicates a military purpose, while latur implies investigating something in order to make a choice about it. Similarly, when the people suggested, let us send men ahead of us, the word lifanenu, which was absent in God's command, implied that these scouts would be sent for a military purpose. Thus, man's request to send spies for a military purpose was entirely different from God's command to experience the land of Israel. This one example speaks to a much larger approach in Nachmanides' commentary of using thematic analysis to interpret variant repetitions. As outlined in his introductory comments to each of the 5 books of the Torah, Nachmanides believed that each book of the Torah has a unique theme, and the book is structured to reflect that theme, as our own Revel professor, Dr. Elman, has written about. In Sefer Dvarim, Nachmanides understood purposeful repetition to be the larger theme of the book. This thematic focus was precisely the tool that he used to analyze the variant repetitions. This analysis yielded a reading of the text that was sensitive to Moshe's specific point of view and his particular message. Clearly, Nachmanides also believed that Moshe played a very active role in the shaping of Sefer Dvarim, and as such, the formulation of the narratives of Moshe's speech reflect his particular point of view. I think that this exploration is particularly fitting for me to share with you today because it demonstrates the impact that Revel has had on my role as a teacher of Tanakh. In this case, it gave me a framework to explore questions that I was grappling with in my own learning and teaching, and exposed me to scholarship that would allow me to scientifically research an important question. While my focus is teaching Torah and not scholarship, there's not a class that I've taught or a topic that I've studied that has not been enhanced, expanded, and nurtured by my studies at Revel. I will always be grateful for the breadth of knowledge that I was exposed to and the skills that I acquired which I continue to develop and guide my learning and teaching of Torah. Thank you.